You mentioned that child poverty is central to that. For every child to be lifted out of poverty, Prime Minister, will you agree that they need to live in a safe, warm, secure home? Remember the tragic case of Awab Ishaq, the 2-year-old that died in Rochdale in, frankly, unsuitable, uninhabitable conditions of damp and mould. And it's welcome that the new government has set its priority on tackling this issue. Prime Minister, when this new regulation is highlighted and brought in later this year, are you confident that this legislation on tackling damp and mould will be enforceable?
Yes, I think it's really important, and thank you for highlighting it, because it was a terrible case that in this country, in these times, anybody could die in those circumstances. So that's why we made the pledge to put it into law. We've put it into law and we will. I don't think we can simply say that that law on its own will do all the work that is needed. That is why we've strengthened what we've put in place for standards in housing across the board, including checks on landlords to do things like electricity safety checks as well. So yes, I'm confident that it's the right law. Yes, I think it is enforceable and will be enforced. But I don't think in any of these fields to do with either housing or poverty, there's one silver bullet that solves all the problems.
Because one of the issues, Prime Minister, you may be aware, is that a number of landlords, including local authorities, are saying that they're struggling in terms of the funding and enforcement to carry out those necessary checks. We've heard that the courts, we know that there's a backlog in the courts in terms of residents bringing forward those cases. So just coming back to that enforceability, Prime Minister, as a lawyer, you know, for anything to be enforceable, it has to have the right protection around it. So just wanting to know if there's been discussions and that interdepartmental discussions to make sure that these cases are escalated when tenants bring them before the courts.
Yes, there have been. And one of the ways in which I've set up the work of government is to have key ministers on key commitments reporting in to me for a stocktake on a regular basis, where we go through progress, what measures are in place, etc. And housing, as you would expect, is one of those. There are 6 areas where we have these regular stocktakes, and housing is one of them. So the Deputy Prime Minister and her team come into number 10. We have a session where we go through a number of different issues, but decent standards and housing and enforceability is among them.
Okay. You'll recall last time we met, Prime Minister, I asked you about the government's decision to freeze the local housing allowance. And coming back to the issue around child poverty, this is an area which is keeping many children and their families in poverty because they cannot afford the rent. The recent data from the local government association responsible for all councils shows that there's a funding gap of around £7 million over the last 5 years. This is a key area pushing many people more into poverty. So I asked you again, Prime Minister, do you think that that was the right decision from a government that's ambitious on tackling child poverty?
Look, I think I defend the decisions we've made. Obviously, we head into the autumn. We will get to another budget, and there'll be a chance to look again across the board. But we certainly made the right decision first time around. I think I'd also emphasise something I touched on last time, which is in the end, with housing, we need to build and make available more housing across the board. There simply isn't enough, and that
but
means
the starts,
price goes
Prime
up.
Minister, you may have seen are quite low. We're not building those houses quickly enough, and we will see more people and more children in poverty. We can't build our way out of this crisis. So in the interim, what more can the government do to help alleviate that poverty that families
as I
are
say,
facing?
there'll be a child poverty strategy which we're setting out in the autumn. We will go into the budget in the autumn as well, and alleviating poverty is a priority of mine. I do think that we need to build more, though, and we have to build more because we've had a problem for many years of not building enough social and affordable housing in this country. And until we crack that problem, we will never be able to get to the fundamental roots of the failures here. And that's why, on that issue in particular, I'm pressing the Deputy Prime Minister very hard.
Prime Minister, on that though, when homes are built in expensive parts of the country, it's very hard for social landlords to afford to buy them at the rate they would need to make sure that the rents are truly affordable rents. So is there anything that on your radar about how you're going to ensure that not just the supply of housing, but the supply of really properly affordable social housing is
that's why we've made a commitment within the building commitment for social and affordable housing and put down £39 billion, which is the biggest amount
over 10 years.
Put behind. Well, yes, but
I'm just saying, just be clear.
well, I appreciate that, but there is always the duty of government to deal with the here and now, of course, but also to deal with the mid and long term. And one of the big problems, in my view, of the last 14 years is nobody did the mid and long term. So we lived with the ever-decreasing cycle of failure and short-term sticking plaster, and I'm determined that we're going to cut through that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
Just following on from Florence's last question on local housing allowance. Some 45% of households now face a shortfall between the local housing allowance they receive and the rent they pay. Some local authorities top this up, and that's costing them in aggregate £204 million. But when we did a study, the PAC did a study on this way back in January, your officials at DWP could not tell us what effect the freezing of these local housing allowances would have on increased homelessness, because there must be an effect.
Well, I hope that since then they've provided you with a letter or some further evidence. If they haven't, I shall make sure I do after this session. But in relation to homelessness, that is also an initiative led by the Deputy Prime Minister. It's one of the priorities that I've given her, and we have put a lot of money, so £950 million, into more temporary accommodation. That's money straight into local authorities, because often it's a lack of temporary accommodation that is one of the causes of the problem. And overall, we're investing £1 billion in reducing homelessness, and that involves a lot of preventative work. So there is a central focus on homelessness, quite a lot of money being put behind it, but particularly focus on this question of temporary accommodation available to local authorities.
So if I could just stick with homelessness a minute. We discovered that the cladding remediation levy was sucking up so much of developers' funds that the affordable housing starts in London last year, from a fairly low base, I accept, dropped by 90%. Yeah. That surely is not going to help either the people who are made homeless or your overall effort to reduce poverty, is it?
No, and we need to drive that up, and that's a problem we've identified and are working on. Obviously, we've got to do the necessary work on cladding. That's got to be financed, but you're absolutely right that we need to turn that number around and drive it up. And so the Deputy Prime Minister is across all these issues of housing.
So one of the hardest things I found in our inquiry was that at June 24, almost 6,000 households with children were being housed in bed and breakfasts, of which almost 4,000 were over the 6-week limit. I just ask you, Prime Minister, to imagine what it's like living B&B with children, especially over when you're having to get out probably at 9 o'clock in the morning and not come back till 6 o'clock in the evening. It must be pretty hard. And of that, so we found that 39,000 households were living in occupying temporary accommodation outside their normal home area. So there will be people living over the 6-week limit with B&Bs, with children, outside their area, trying to struggle to get to schools or work or whatever it is they have to do. I really wonder, what would you suggest you can do to begin to solve that problem?
Well, firstly, let me acknowledge it's a real problem, has a huge impact on families, and not just the physical aspects of living in those conditions and the cramped and small circumstances, but also in very many cases the ability of a child, for example, to get on with their homework and get on at school. So it has not just immediate short-term consequences, it has longer-term consequences, because those same children, once they're struggling at school, will then struggle further down the line in school. That is why it's important that we have put the extra money into temporary accommodation for local authorities to make sure there's a wider range of accommodation. Now, you can't fix this overnight, but you're absolutely right, it needs to be turned around for all the reasons that you've identified, and I absolutely understand.
Thank you
very much.
Florence
Thank you,
O'Shea.
Chair.
Just on that, Prime Minister, every homeless child means a child missing school, a child missing out on a vital and welcome breakfast club that your government have committed to, a child or adult missing out on those extra hospital appointments because they don't have a safe and secure home to go to. We are seeing councils at breaking point because of the additional money spent on temporary accommodations. A number of councils declaring bankrupt because of temporary accommodation. This is not sustainable. And I come back to some of the measures that have been taken by the government. So just to ask, do you feel, Prime Minister, then, that we do need to have an urgent reset in local government funding to look at these long-term solutions and key pressures facing councils up and down the country?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, let me say we have put £1 billion into homelessness. That is a huge amount, more than any government's put in for a very, very long time, for precisely the reasons that have been identified by this committee. So there's an absolute commitment on homelessness, and the money was put there in the budget and the spending review to make good on the commitment on homelessness. On the wider question of local authority funding, yes, I do think it needs a review. I've long thought it needs a review, amongst other things. We need multi-year settlements. There are no end of local authorities that say to me, because it's a year-on-year allocation of money, we can't use the money as effectively as we might otherwise be able to do. There are, I don't know how many local authorities who say to me, until you fix, as we are now doing, the no-fault eviction problem, you'll have a homelessness problem, and the bill will be picked up by local authorities. That's why we brought in the provisions to get rid of no-fault evictions. So I absolutely agree with you. This needs review, it needs change. We've started the process of change, and they would be, as it were, the top contenders that, for me, of what we're getting on with to bring about a material change as quickly as we can.
Okay, that's good. So it'll be good to know when we'll expect to see some of those changes and the extra investment, and if it's something that...
Well, the investment in homelessness has gone in already. I mean, the money's been made available.
When do you expect to see a change?
Well, as soon as possible. I've got the Deputy Prime Minister project managing this. We're looking across the numbers, we're getting the money to where it needs to be, but the financial commitment and the political commitment are in place, and the Deputy Prime Minister is pretty focused. I mean, it matters hugely to her, it matters hugely to me, and therefore we're driving it through central government.
I talked earlier about your